I was many hundred miles away from home and friends, and had been very ill for many weeks. I was entirely among strangers, and my only attendant, though of a kindly disposition, knew nothing whatever of the duties of the sick room. Hence, I had none of the many delicate attentions that keep up an invalid's failing strength. I had taken no nourishment of any kind for nearly 3 weeks, scarcely even water, and was greatly reduced in both flesh and strength, and consciousness seemed at times to wholly desert me. I had an unutterable longing for the presence of my dear distant ones, for the gentle touch of beloved hands, and whispered words of love and courage. But they never came. They could not. Responsible duties that I felt must not be neglected kept these dear ones much of the time in distant scenes, and I would not recall them. I lay in a large, comfortable room on the second floor of a house in Kentville. The bed stood in a recess at one end of the apartment, and from this recess a large stained glass window opened upon a veranda fronting the street. During much of my illness, I lay with my face to this window and my back to the room. I remember thinking how easy it would be to pass through the window to the veranda if one so desired. When the longing for the loved distant faces and voices became more than I could bear, I prayed that the dear Christ would help me to realize his blessed presence, and that since the beloved ones of earth could not minister to me, I might feel the influence of the other dear ones who are all ministering spirits. Especially did I ask to be sustained, should I indeed be called to pass through the dark waters alone. It was no idle prayer, and the response came swiftly, speedily. All anxieties and cares slipped away from me as a worn-out garment, and peace, Christ's peace, enfolded me. I was willing to wait God's time for the coming of those dear to me, and said to myself more than once, if not here, it will be there. There is no fear of disappointment there. In those wonderful days of agonized suffering and great peace, I felt that I had truly found as never before the refuge of the everlasting arms. They lifted me, they upbore me, they unfolded me, and I rested in them as a tired child upon its mother's bosom. One morning, dark and cold and stormy, after a day and night of intense suffering, I seemed to be standing on the floor by the bed in front of the stained glass window. Someone was standing by me, and when I looked up, I saw it. It was my husband's favorite brother, who crossed the flood many years ago. My dear brother Frank, I cried out joyously, how good of you to come. It was a great joy to me that I could do so, little sister, he said gently. Shall we go now? And he drew me toward the window. I turned my head and looked back into the room that I somehow felt I was about to leave forever. It was in its usual order, a cheery, pretty room. The attendant sat by the stove at the farther end, comfortably reading a newspaper on the bed. Turned toward the window lay a white, still form with the shadow of a smile on the poor, worn face. My brother drew me gently, and I yielded, passing with him through the window out on the veranda. From thence, in some unaccountable way, down the street. There, I paused and said earnestly, I cannot leave Will and our dear boy. They are not here, dear, but hundreds of miles away, he answered. Yes, I know, but they will be here. Oh, Frank, they will need me. Let me stay, I pleaded. Would it not be better if I brought you back a little later, after they come? He said with a kind smile. Would you surely do so? I asked. Most certainly, if you desire it. You are worn out with the long suffering, and a little rest will give you new strength. I felt that he was right, said so in a few words, and we started slowly up the street. He had drawn my hand with his arm and endeavored to interest me as we walked. But my heart clung to the dear ones whom I felt I was not going to see again on earth, and several times I stopped and looked wistfully back, the way we had come. He was very patient and gentle with me, waiting always until I was ready to proceed again. But at last my hesitation became so great that he pleasantly said, "You are so weak, I think I had better carry you." And without waiting for a reply, he stooped and lifted me into his arms, as though I had been a little child. And, like a child, I yielded, resting my head upon his shoulder, laying my arm about his neck. I felt so safe, so content, to be thus in his care. It seemed so sweet, after the long, lonely struggle, to have someone assume the responsibility of caring so much for me. He walked on with firm, swift steps, and I think I must have slept. For the next I knew, I was sitting in a sheltered nook, made by flowering shrubs, upon the softest and most beautiful turf of grass, thickly studded with fragrant flowers, many of them the flowers I had known and loved on earth. I remember noticing heliotrope, violets, and lilies of the valley, with many others of like nature, wholly unfamiliar to me. But even in that first moment, I observed how perfect, in its way, was every plant and flower. For instance, the heliotrope, which with us often runs into long, ragged sprays, there grew upon short, smooth stems, and each leaf was perfect and smooth and glossy, instead of being rough and coarse-looking. And the flowers peeped up from the deep grass, so like velvet, with sweet, happy faces, as though inviting the admiration one could not withhold. And what a scene was that on which I looked, as I rested upon this soft, fragrant cushion. Secluded and yet not hidden, away, far beyond the limit of my vision, I well knew, stretched this wonderful sward of perfect grass and flowers, and out of it grew equally wonderful trees, whose drooping branches were laden with exquisite blossoms and fruits of many kinds. I found myself thinking of St. John's vision while on the island of Patmos, the tree of life that grew in the midst of the garden, bearing 12 manner of fruits, and whose leaves were for the healing of the nations. Beneath the trees, in many happy groups, were little children, laughing and playing, running here and there in their joy, and catching in their tiny hands the bright-winged birds that flitted in and out among them, as though sharing in their sports, as they doubtless were. All through the grounds, older people were walking, sometimes in groups, sometimes by twos, sometimes alone, but all with an air of peacefulness and happiness that made itself felt even by me, a stranger. All were in spotless white, though many wore about them or carried in their hands clusters of beautiful flowers. As I looked upon their happy faces and their spotless robes, again I thought, these are they who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Look where I would, I saw, half hidden by the trees, elegant and beautiful houses of strangely attractive architecture that I felt must be the homes of the happy inhabitants of this enchanted place. I caught glimpses of sparkling fountains in many directions, and close to my retreat flowed a river with placid breast and water clear as crystal. The walks that ran in many directions through the grounds appeared to me to be, and I afterward found were, of pearl, spotless and pure, bordered on either side by narrow streams of pellucid water running over stones of gold. The one thought that fastened itself upon me as I looked, breathless and speechless, upon this scene was purity, purity. No shadow of dust, no taint of decay on fruit or flower, everything perfect, everything pure. The grass and flowers looked as though fresh washed by summer showers, and not a single blade was any color but the brightest green. The air was soft and balmy, though invigorating, and instead of sunlight there was a golden and rosy glory everywhere, something like the afterglow of a southern sunset in midsummer. As I drew in my breath with a short, quick gasp of delight, I heard my brother, who was standing beside me, say softly, "Well?" And, looking up, I discovered that he was watching me with keen enjoyment. I had, in my great surprise and delight, wholly forgotten his presence. Recalled to myself by his question, I faltered, "Oh, Frank, that I..." when such an overpowering sense of God's goodness and my own unworthiness swept over me that I dropped my face into my hands and burst into uncontrollable and very human weeping. Said my brother in a tone of self-reproach, "I am inconsiderate." In lifting me gently to my feet, he said, "Come, I want to show you the river." When we reached the brink of the river, but a few steps distant, I found that the lovely sward ran even to the water's edge, and in some places I saw flowers blooming placidly down in the depths among the many-colored pebbles with which the entire bed of the river was lined. "I want to see these beautiful stones," said my brother, stepping into the water, urging me to do the same. I drew back timidly, saying, "I fear it's cold." "Not in the least," he said, with a reassuring smile. "Come." "Just as I am?" I said, glancing down at my lovely robe, which to my great joy I found was similar to those of the dwellers in that happy place. "Just as you are," with another reassuring smile. Thus encouraged, I too stepped into the gently flowing river, and to my great surprise, found the water in both temperature and density almost identical with the air. Deeper and deeper grew the stream as we passed on until I felt the soft, sweet ripples playing about my throat. As I stopped, my brother said, "A little farther still." "It will go over my head," I expostulated. "Well, and what then?" "I cannot breathe underwater. I will suffocate." And an amused twinkle came into his eyes, though he said soberly enough, "We do not do those things here." I realized the absurdity of my position, and with a happy laugh said, "All right," and plunged my head into the bright water, which soon bubbled and rippled several feet above my head. To my surprise and delight, I found I could not only breathe, but I could laugh and talk, as naturally under the water as above it. I sat down in the midst of the many-colored pebbles, and filled my hands with them as a child would have done. My brother lay down upon them as he would have done on the green grass, and laughed and talked joyously with me. "Do this," he said, rubbing his hands over his face and running his fingers through his dark hair. I did as he told me, and the sensation was delightful. I threw back my loose sleeves and rubbed my arms, and then my throat, and again thrust my fingers through my long, loose hair, thinking at that time what a tangle it would be in when I left the water. Then the thought came as we at last arose to return. What are we to do for towels? For the earth thoughts still clung to me, and I wondered, too, if the lovely robe was not entirely spoiled. But behold, as we neared the shore, and my head once more emerged from the water, the moment the air struck my face and hair, I realized I would need no towel or brush. My flesh and hair, even my beautiful garments, were soft and dry as they were before the water touched them. The material out of which my robe was fashioned was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was soft and light and shone with a faint luster, reminding me more of a silk crepe than anything I could recall, only infinitely more beautiful. It fell about me in soft, graceful folds, which the water seemed to have rendered even more lustrous than before. "What marvelous water! What wonderful air!" I said to my brother, as we again stepped upon the flowery sward. "Are all the rivers here like this one?" "Not just the same, but similar," he replied. We walked on a few steps, and then I turned and looked back at the shining river flowing on tranquilly. "Frank, what has that water done for me?" I said. "I feel as though I could fly." He looked at me with earnest, tender eyes as he answered gently, "It has washed away the last of the earth life and fitted you for your new life upon which you have entered." "It is divine," I whispered. "Yes, it is divine," he said. We walked on for some distance in silence, my heart wrestling with the thoughts of the new strange life, my eyes drinking in the fresh beauty at every step. The houses, as we approached and passed them, seemed wondrously beautiful to me. They were built of the finest marble, encircled by broad verandas. The roofs or domes supported by massive or delicate pillars or columns, and winding steps led down to the pearl and golden walks. The style of the architecture was unlike anything I had ever seen, and the flowers and vines that grew luxuriantly everywhere surpassed in beauty even those of my brightest dreams. Happy faces looked out from those columned walls, and happy voices rang upon the clear air from many celestial homes. "Frank, where are we going?" At length I asked. "Home, little sister," he answered tenderly. "Home? Have we a home, my brother? Is it anything like these?" I asked with a wild desire in my heart to cry out for joy. "Come and see," was his only answer, as he turned into a side path leading toward an exquisitely beautiful house whose columns of very light gray marble shone through the light green of the overhanging trees with the most inviting beauty. Before I could join him, I heard a well-remembered voice saying close beside me, "I just had to be the first to bid you welcome." And looking around, I saw the dearly beloved face of my old-time friend, Mrs. Wickham. Oh, I cried as we met in a warm embrace. "You will forgive me, Colonel Spragg," she said a moment later, giving her hand cordially to my brother. "It seems unpardonable to intercept you like this. In almost the first hour, I heard that you were coming, and I could not wait. But now I've looked upon her face and heard her dear voice, and I will be patient till I could have her for a long, long talk." "You must come in and see her now," said my brother cordially. Do come in," I urged. No, dear friends, not now. You know, little Dear Blossom, that old pet name for me years ago, we have all eternity before us. But you will bring her to me soon, Colonel Sprague, right? She said. Just as soon as I may, dear madam, he replied, with an expressive look into her eyes. Yes, I understand, she said softly, with a sympathetic glance at me. Then with a warm hand clasp and the parting injunction, come very soon, she passed swiftly out of my sight. Blessed woman, I said, what a joy to meet her again. Her home is not far away, so you can often see her. She is indeed a lovely woman. Now come, little sister. I long to give you welcome to our home. Saying which, he took my hand and led me up the low steps onto the broad veranda, with its beautiful inlaid floor of rare and costly marble, and its massive columns of gray, between which vines covered with rich, glossy leaves of green were intermingled with flowers of exquisite color and delicate perfume hanging in heavy festoons. We paused for a moment there, that I might see the charming view presented on every side. It's heavenly, I said. It is heavenly, he answered. It could not be otherwise. I smiled my acknowledgement of this truth. My heart was too full for words. The entire house, both below and above, is surrounded by these broad verandas. But come within. He led me through the doorway, between the marble columns, into a large reception hall, whose inlaid floor, mullioned window, and broad, low stairway at the far end at once held my fancy. Before I could speak, my brother turned to me, and taking both my hands, said, Welcome, 1,000 welcomes, dearest sister, to your heavenly home. Is this beautiful place indeed to be my home? I asked, as well as my emotion would allow. Yes, dear, he replied. I built it for you and my brother. I assure you, it has been a labor of love. It is your home, and I'm to stay with you? I said, a little confused. No, it is your home, and I'm to stay with you till my little brother comes. Always, dear brother, always, I cried, clinging to his arm. He smiled and said, We will enjoy the present. We will never be far apart again. But come, I am eager to show you all. Turning to the left, he led me, still through the beautiful marble columns that everywhere seemed substituted for doorways, into a large oblong room upon whose threshold I stopped in wondering delight. The entire walls and floor of the room were still of that exquisite light gray marble, polished to the greatest luster, but over walls and floors were strewn exquisite long-stemmed roses of every variety and color, from the deepest crimson to the most delicate shades of pink and yellow. Come inside, said my brother. I do not wish to crush those perfect flowers, I answered. Well then, suppose we gather some of them. I stooped to take one from the floor close to my feet, when lo, I found it was embedded in the marble. I tried another, with the same astonishing result. Then, turning to my brother, I said, What does this mean? You surely do not tell me that none of these are natural flowers. He nodded his head with a pleased smile and said, This room has a history. Come in and sit with me here upon this window, where you can see the whole room, and let me tell you about it. I did as he desired, and he continued. One day, as I was busy working upon the home, a company of young people, boys and girls, came to the door and asked if they might enter, and I gladly gave assent. And then one of them said, Is this house really for Mr. and Mrs. Sprague? "It is," I answered. "We used to know and love them. They're our friends, and the friends of our parents. And we want to know if we may do something to help you make it beautiful." "Indeed you may," I said, touched by the request. "What can you do?" "We were here at the home and looking about," one of them asked. "May we beautify this room?" "Undoubtedly," I said, wondering what they would try and do. At once, the girls, all of whom had immense bunches of roses in their hands, began to throw the flowers broadcast over the floor and against the walls. Wherever they struck the walls, they, to even my surprise, remained as though in some way perfectly and permanently attached. When the roses had all been scattered, the room looked just as it does now, only the flowers were really fresh gathered roses. Then the boys each produced a small case of delicate tools, and in a moment, all, boys and girls, were down upon the marble floor and busy at work. How did they do it? I did not know. It is one of the celestial arts, taught to those of highly artistic tastes, but they embedded each flower, each living flower, just where it is and where it has fallen, in the marble, and preserved it as you see before you. They came several times before the work was completed, for the flowers do not wither here nor fade, but were always fresh and perfect. And such a merry, happy company of young people I never saw before. They laughed and chatted and sang as they worked, and I could not help wishing more than once that the friends whom they had left mourning for them might look upon this happy group and see how little cause they had for sorrow. At last, when all was complete, they called to me to see their work. And I was not chary of my praises either, for the beauty of the work or for their skill performing it. Then, saying they would be sure to return when either of you came, they went away together to do something of the kind elsewhere, I doubt not. Happy tears had been dropping upon my hands, clasped idly into my lap, desiring much of this narrative. And now I asked, half brokenly, for I was greatly touched, "Who were these lovely people, Frank? Do you know them?" "Of course I know them, now. But they were all strangers to me until they came here that first morning, except Lulu Spragg." "Who are they?" "They were 3 Marys, Mary Green, Mary Bates, Mary Chalmers, Lulu Spragg, and May Camden. These were the girls, each lovely and beautiful. The boys, all manly, fine fellows, were Carol Ashland, Stanley, and David Chalmers." "Precious children," I said. "How little I thought my love for them in the olden days would ever bring me to this added happiness here. How little we know of the links binding the 2 worlds." "Ah, yes," my brother said. "That's just it. How little we know. If only we could realize, while we are yet mortals, that day by day we are building for eternity, how different our lives in many ways would be. Every gentle word, every generous thought, every unselfish deed will become a pillar of eternal beauty in the life to come. We cannot be selfish and unloving in one life and then generous and loving in the next. The 2 lives are too closely blended, one but a continuation of the other. But come now to the library. Rising, we crossed the room that henceforth was to hold for me such tender associations, and entered the library. It was a glorious apartment, the walls lined from ceiling to floor with rare and costly books. A large stained glass window opened upon the front veranda, and two large bow windows not far apart were in the back of the room. A semicircular row of shelves supported by very delicate pillars of gray marble about 6 feet high extended some 15 feet into the spacious main room and cut it into two sections lengthwise, each with one of the bowed windows in the back, leaving still a large space beyond the dividing line, where the two sections united again into one. The concave side of the semicircle of the shelves was toward the entrance of the room, and close to it, not far removed from the bowed window, stood a beautiful writing desk with everything ready to use. Upon it was a chaste golden bowl filled with scarlet carnations, of whose spicy odor I had been dimly conscious for some time. My brother's desk," said Frank. "And his favorite flowers," I added. "Yes, that follows. Here we never forget the taste and preference of those we love." It is not to be supposed that these details were at once noticed by me, but they unfolded to me gradually as we lingered talking together. My first sensation upon entering the room was genuine surprise at the sight of the books, and my first words were, "Why have we books in heaven?" "Why not?" asked my brother. What strange ideas we have as mortals of the pleasures and duties of this blessed life. We seem to think that death of the body means an entire change to the soul. But that is not the case, by any means. We bring to this life the same tastes and desires, the same knowledge we had before death. If these were not sufficiently pure and good to form a part of this life, then we ourselves may not enter. What would be the use of our often long lives given to the pursuit of certain worthy and legitimate knowledge if at death it all counts as nothing, and we begin this life on a wholly different line of thought and study? No. Would that all could understand, as I said before, that we are building for eternity during our earthly life. The purer are the thoughts, the nobler the ambitions, the loftier the aspirations, the higher the rank we take among the hosts of heaven. The more earnestly we follow the studies and duties in our life of probation, the better fitted we shall be to carry them forward, on and on to completion and perfection here. But the books, who writes them? Are any of them books we knew and loved below? Undoubtedly, many of them, all indeed, that in any way helped to elevate the human mind or immortal soul. Then, many of the rarest minds in the earth life, upon entering this higher life, gain such elevated and extended views of the subjects that have been with them lifelong studies, pursuing them with zest, they write out for the benefit of those less gifted the higher, stronger views they have themselves acquired, thus remaining leaders and teachers in this rarer life as they were while yet in the world. Is it to be expected that the great soul who has so recently joined our ranks, whose changed life and Pax Vobiscum uplifted so many lives while on earth, should lay his pen aside when his clear brain and great heart have read the mystery of the higher knowledge? Not so. When he has conned his lesson well, he will write them out for the benefit of others, less gifted, who must follow. Leaders there must always be in this divine life, as in the former life, leaders and teachers in many varied lines of thought. But all this knowledge will come to you simply and naturally as you grow into the new life. After a short rest in this lovely room among the books, my brother took me through all the remaining rooms of the house, each perfect and beautiful in its way, each distinctly and imperishably photographed upon my memory. Of only one other will I speak at this time. As he drew aside the gauzy gray draperies lined the most delicate shade of amber, which hung before the columned doorway of a lovely room on the second floor of the house, he said, "Your own special place for rest and study." The entire second story of the house, indoors instead of being finished in gray marble, was, as was the first floor, was finished with inlaid woods of fine satiny texture and rare polish. In the room we now entered was exquisite, both in design and finish. It was oblong in shape, with a large bowed window at one end, similar to those in the library, a portion of which was directly beneath this room. Within this window, on one side, stood a writing desk of solid ivory, with silver appointments, and opposite was a case of well-filled bookshelves of the same material. Among the books, I found afterward many of my favorite authors. Rich rugs, silver gray in color, lay scattered over the floor, and all the hangings in the room were of the same delicate hue and texture as those at the entrance. The framework of the furniture was of ivory, the upholstering of the chairs and ottomans of silver gray cloth, with the finish of the finest satin, and the pillows and coverings of the dainty couch were of the same. A large bowl of wrought silver stood upon the table near the front windows, filled with pink and yellow roses whose fragrance filled the air, and several rarely graceful vases also were filled with roses. The entire apartment was beautiful beyond description, but I had seen it many times before I was fully able to comprehend its perfect completeness. Only one picture hung upon the walls, and that was a life-size portrait of the Christ, just opposite the couch. It was not an artist's conception of the human Christ, bowed under the weight of sins of the world, nor yet the thorn-crowned head of the crucified Savior of mankind, but the likeness of the living Master, of Christ, the victorious, Christ, the crowned. The wonderful eyes looked directly and tenderly into our own, and the lips seemed to pronounce the benediction of peace. An ineffable beauty of the divine face seemed to illuminate the room with a holy light, and I fell upon my knees and pressed my lips to the sandaled feet so truthfully portrayed upon the canvas, while my heart cried, "Master, beloved Master and Savior." It was long before I could fix my attention on anything else. My whole being was full of adoration and thanksgiving for the great love that had guided me into this haven of rest, this wonderful home of peace and joy. After some time spent in this delightful place, we passed through the open window on to the marble terrace. A stairway of artistically finished marble wound gracefully down from this terrace to the lawn beneath the trees. No pathway of any kind approaching at its foot, only the flowery turf. The fruit-laden branches of the trees hung within easy reach from the terrace. And I noticed as I stood there that morning 7 varieties. One kind resembled our fine Bartlett pear, only much larger and infinitely more delicious to the taste, as I soon found. Another variety was in clusters. The fruit is also pear-shaped, but smaller than the former, and of a consistency and flavor similar to the finest frozen cream. And third, something like a banana in shape, they called the breadfruit. It was not unlike our dainty finger rolls to the taste. It seemed to me at the time, and really proved to be so, that in variety and excellence, food for the most elegant repast has here provided without labor or care. My brother gathered some of the different varieties and bade me try them. I did so with much relish and refreshment. Once the rich juice from the pear-like fruit, whose distinctive name I have forgotten, if indeed I ever knew it, ran out profusely over my hands in the front of my dress. "Oh," I cried, "I've ruined my dress." My brother laughed. "Show me the stains." To my amazement, not a spot could I find. "Look at your hands," he said. I found them clean and fresh, as though just from the bath. "What does this mean? My hands were covered with the juice of that fruit." "Simply," he answered, "that no impurity can remain for an instant in this air. Nothing decays, nothing tarnishes, or in any way disfigures or mars the universal beauty or purity of that place. As fast as the fruit ripens and falls, all that is not immediately gathered at once evaporates. Not even the seed remains." I had noticed that no fruit lay beneath the trees. This, then, was the reason for it. "And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth," I quoted thoughtfully. "Yes, even so," he answered. We descended the steps again, entered the flower room. As I stood once more admiring the inlaid roses, my brother asked, "Whom of all the friends you have in heaven do you most wish to see?" "My father and mother," I answered quickly. He smiled significantly. That I hastily turned, and there, advancing up the long room to meet me, I saw my dear father and mother, and with them my youngest sister. With a cry of joy I flew into my father's outstretched arms and heard with a thrill of joy his dear familiar, "My precious little girl." At last," I cried, clinging to him. "At last I have you again." "At last," he echoed, with a deep-drawn breath of joy. Then he resigned me to my dear mother, and we were soon clasped in each other's embrace. "My precious mother! My dear child!" we cried simultaneously. And my sister, unfolding us both in her arms, exclaimed with a happy laugh, "I cannot wait! I will not be left outside." And disengaging one arm, I threw it about her and drew her into the happy circle of our excited, united love. Oh, what an hour that was! I did not dream that even heaven could hold such joy. After a time, my brother, who had shared in our joy, said, "Now, I can safely leave you for a few hours to this blessed reunion, for I have other work before me." "Yes," said my father, "you must go. We will with joy take charge of our dear child." "Then for a brief while goodbye," said my brother kindly. "Do not forget that rest, especially to one but recently entered upon the new life. It is not only one of the pleasures, but one of the duties of heaven." "Yes, we will see that she does not forget that," said my father, with a kindly smile and glance. Soon after my brother's departure, my mother said, grasping my hand, "Come, I'm eager to have you in our own home." And we all passed out of the rear entrance, walked a few hundred yards across the soft turf, and entered a lovely home somewhat similar to our own, yet still unlike it in many details. It also was built of marble, but darker than that of my brother's home. Every room spoke of a modest refinement and cultivated taste, and the home air about it was at once delightfully perceptible. My father's study was on the second floor, and the first thing I noticed on entering was the luxuriant branches and flowers of an old-fashioned rose tree that covered the window by his desk. "Ah!" I cried. "I can almost imagine myself in your old study at home when I look at this window." "Is it not a reminder?" he said, laughing happily. "I almost think sometimes it is the same dear old bush, transplanted here." "And it still is your favorite flower?" I queried. He nodded his head and said, smiling, "I see you remember still the childhood days." And he patted my cheek as I gathered a rose and fastened it upon his breast. "It seemed to me this ought to be your home, dear." "It is our father's home," my sister said wistfully. "Nay," my father interposed. "Colonel Spragg is her legitimate guardian and instructor. It is a wise and admirable arrangement. He is in every way the most suitable instructor she could possibly have. Our father never errs." "Is not my brother's a lovely character?" I asked. "Lovely indeed. He stands very near to the master. Few have a clearer knowledge of the divine will. Hence few are better fitted for instructors. But I too have duties that call me for a time away. How blessed to know there can never again be a long separation. You will have 2 homes now, dear child, yours and ours." Yes, I said. "I shall be here, I suspect, almost as much as there." At this moment, a swift messenger approached my father and spoke a few low words. "Yes, I shall go at once," he replied, waving his hand, and departed with the angelic guide. "Where do my father's duties mostly lie?" I asked my mother. "He is called usually to those who enter life with little preparation. That which on earth we call deathbed repentance. You know? What a wonderful success he always had winning souls to Christ. And these poor spirits need to be taught from the very beginning. They enter the spirit life in its lowest phase, and it is your father's pleasant duty to lead them upward step by step. He is devoted to his work and greatly beloved by those he thus helps. He allows me to often accompany him and labor with him, and that is such a pleasure to me. And do you know," with an indescribable look of happiness, "I forget nothing now." It had been her great burden for some years before her death that memory failed her sadly, and I could understand and sympathize with her present delight. "Dear heart," I cried, folding my arms tenderly about her. "Then it is like the early years of your married life again?" "Precisely," she answered joyously. A little later my sister drew me tenderly aside and whispered, "Tell me of my boy, my precious son. I often see him, but we're not permitted to know as much as always of the earthly life as we once believed we should." The Father's tender wisdom metes out to us the knowledge he sees is best, and we are content to wait his time for more. All you can tell would not be denied me. Is he surely coming to me sometime? Shall I hold him again in my arms, my darling boy? I am sure, yes, I am sure you will. Your memory is very precious to him." Then I told her all I could recall of the son with whom she had parted while he was but a child, not grown to a man's estate, honored and loved, with home and wife, son to comfort and bless him. "Then I can wait," she said, "if he is sure to come to me at last when this earthly work is done, bringing his wife and son. Oh, how I shall love them too." At this moment I felt myself encircled by tender arms, and a hand was gently laid on my eyes. "Who is it?" someone whispered softly. "Oh, I know the voice. Dearest Nell," I cried, and turning quickly threw my arms about the neck of my only brother. He gathered me a moment warmly to his heart, then in his old-time playful way lifted me up off my feet in his strong arms, saying, "She is not grown an inch, and is not, I believe, a day older than when we parted. Is she Joe?" turning to our sister. "But I thought she would never come." "Trust her for that," he said. "But come now. They have had you long enough for the first visit. The rest of us want you for a while. Come with us, Jody. Mother, may I have them both for a little time? May I not? Or will you come too?" Turning to our mother with a caressing touch. "I cannot go, dear boy. I must be here when your father returns. Take your sisters. It is a blessed sight to see you all again together." "Come then," he said, and each taking one of my hands, we went out together. "Halt!" he suddenly called, in this old-time military fashion. After a short walk, we stopped abruptly in the front of a dainty house built of the finest polished woods. It was beautiful, both in architecture and finish. "How lovely!" I cried. And with a bow of charming humility, he said, "The home of your humble servant, enter." I paused a moment on the wide veranda to examine a vine, wreathed about in the graceful columns of a highly polished wood. My brother laughingly said to my sister, "She is the same old sis. We will not get much good out of her until she's learned the name of every flower, vine, and plant in heaven." "Yes, you will," I said, shaking my head at his happy face. "But I mean to utilize you wherever I can. I have so much to learn." "So you shall, dear," he answered gently. "But come in." Stepping inside a lively vestibule, out of which opened, from every side, spacious rooms, he called softly, "Alma." At once, from one of these, a fair woman approached us. "My dear child," I said, "it does not seem possible. You were but a child when I last saw you." "She is still her father's girl," said my brother, with a fond look. "She and Carrie, whom you never saw, make a blessed home for me." "Where is your sister, daughter?" "She's at the great music hall. She has a very rich voice that she is cultivating," Alma said, turning to me. "We were going to find our aunt when she returned," she added. "True, true," said my brother, "but come." Then they showed me the lovely home, perfect and charming in every detail. When we came out upon a side veranda, I saw we were so near an adjoining house that we could easily step from one veranda to the other. "There," said my brother, lightly lifting me over the intervening space. "There is someone here you will wish to see." Before I could question him, he led me through the columned doorway, saying, "People in heaven are never not at home to their friends. The house we entered was almost identical to the construction and finish with that of my brother, Nell, and as we entered, 3 persons came eagerly forward to greet me. "Dear Aunt Gray," I cried. "My dear Mary, my dear Martin. What a joy to meet you again." "And here," said my aunt reverently. "Yes, here," I answered in a like tone. It was my father's sister, always a favorite aunt, with her son and his wife. How we did talk and cling to one another and ask and answer questions. "Paula's is also here, and Will, but they have gone with Carrie to the music hall," said Martin. "Martin, can you sing here?" I asked. He always was trying to sing on earth, but could not master a tune. "A little," he answered, with his old genial laugh and shrug. "We can do almost anything here that we really try to do." "You should hear him now, cousin, when he tries to sing," said his wife, with a little touch of pride in her voice. "You would not know it was Martin. But is it not nice to have Dr. Nell so near us? We're almost one household, you see." All felt that we must be together. "It is, indeed," I answered, "although you no longer need him in his professional capacity." "No, thanks to the Father, but we need him quite as much in many other ways." "I rather think I am the one to be grateful," said my brother. "But, sister, I promised Frank that you should go to your own room a while. He thought it wise that you should be alone for a time. Shall we go now?" "I'm ready," I answered, though these delightful reunions leave no desire for rest. "How blessed," said my aunt, "that there is no limit here to our mutual enjoyment. We have nothing to dread, nothing to fear. We know at parting that we shall meet again. We shall often see each other, my child." Then my brother went with me to my own home, and with a loving embrace left me at the door of my room. Once within, I lay down upon my couch to think over the events of this wonderful day, but looking upward at the divine face above me, I forgot all else, and Christ's peace enfolding me like a mantle, I became, quote, "as one whom his mother comforts," unquote. While I lay in this blissful rest, my brother Frank returned, and without arousing me, bore me in his strong arms again to earth. I did not know when he left us in our home upon what mission he was going. Though my father knew it, it was to return to my dear husband and accompany him upon his sad journey to his dead wife, to comfort and sustain and strengthen him in those first lonely hours of sorrow. They deemed it best, for wise reasons, that I should wait a while before returning and taste the blessedness of the new life, thus gaining strength for the trial before me.